Candelabra of Tawnos has been banned in Legacy. This was unexpected. Let's talk about this. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher aka ThrabenU here for another Legacy video, and today we are going to be talking about the June 29th B&R update. Normally I post my videos right away at 11 a.m., but today I needed a little bit of time to record this video, and I figured you all would want this news and my analysis ASAP, so apologies for the late upload today. So, Candelabra is gone from Legacy, Seeker of Skybreak is gone from Pauper, which doesn't surprise me, and Brawl got absolutely gutted. We're gonna focus on the Legacy side of the equation today, as the Pauper format panel does a fantastic job of explaining all of their bans, but that's not always true on the Legacy side. So that I don't have to interrupt myself later on, today's video, as always, is sponsored by TOAMagic.com, and if you need some Magic cards for this new format, or you need some of the Marvel stuff, as some of it is having an impact on Legacy, looking at you, Fantasticar, use promo code ThrabenU to save yourself a little bit on your order. And if you're looking for my deck lists, in this new Legacy world that we're going to be playing in, as always, they are available on moxfield.com, and one of the things I love about Moxfield is you can just create all sorts of folders to keep everything nice and organized, and I keep all of my Legacy decks organized by era and sort of the different banning waves that we have. So, new folder today. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Before I dive into Legacy, because I feel like many people are going to be keeping a very close eye on this date, the next B&R update on this is August 10th, so it's not actually that far away. So, hypothetically, if something else starts ruining the Legacy format, we only have to wait a little over a month. That's honestly not all that bad. My biggest complaint about this Legacy B&R update in terms of the words on the page are that the majority of the article doesn't actually say anything meaningful. This is fluff and history. This is fluff and history. There's a deck list. And then this is fluff and history. This is fluff and history. So the first 4 paragraphs of this are basically just junk that is unnecessary. And then we get a recap of the previous B&R update here, where WotC mentions that they're keeping an eye on colorless Tron, that they might have a problematic meta share and win percentage. So again, nothing really new here. So the article relevantly really starts 5 or 6 paragraphs in. And at this point, we start talking about something that resembles data. And they are afraid of the trajectory that the current colorless Tron deck is on. And it recently met in the finals of a Legacy Showcase Challenge with another copy in the top 8. And the population, that is the percentage of people playing this deck, keeps going up without impacting its win rate. Meaning more and more people are jumping to this deck. It's becoming a more known force in the metagame, but the new players picking up the deck and its increased metagame percentage, so more people would be gunning for it, is not actually causing its win rate to go down, according to Wizards of the Coast's data. And at this point, I highly suspect that these decisions are locked in a decent amount of time before the articles are published. And I don't know how far ahead, but it often feels like by the time these articles are live, the data is not quite right. When you look at the data from MTG Goldfish, which I'm not putting on screen because that site has just become absolutely infested with ads to the point where it's borderline unusable as a content creator. If you look at Tron in the last, let's do 30 days, it's at a little over 11% of the metagame. Easily putting it at the top deck in the format. When you go down to the last 14 days, it's actually slightly behind Izzet Delver at 10.1% of the format, which still clearly puts it as a top deck. But just kind of giving you all some perspective, this is about when Reanimator really started taking off, and in this time period, Reanimator is about the 3rd best deck in the format. And when we go to the last 7 days, and keep in mind sample sizes here are a little bit small, Tron is the 6th most played deck in the format, with Izzet Delver, Rakdos Reanimator, the Epic Storm, Sneak and Show, and Dimir Tempo all being above it. And why is that happening? Because the fucking Fantasticar got printed and completely changed the format. And the Delver decks weren't doing great. But when you get something that is threatening to just 16 you incredibly consistently on turn 1, having access to Daze, Force of Will, and Thoughtseize all at the same time from Dimir Tempo starts to become pretty attractive, or having access to Daze and Force of Will backed by a very quick clock, so that if you go and stop the initial onslaught of the Fantasticar, you can potentially kill your opponent before they have the chance to try again, becomes pretty darn good. And the Storm decks are on the rise because they have the ability to do Fantasticar stuff better than just about anything else. Dark Ritual Fantasticar, and then 2 pieces of Artifact mana just does it and 16s your opponent and kills them over the course of 2 turns without you having to really rely on your complex engine, and you don't have to gamble on, sometimes literally, on your Echo of Eons lines. And Legacy is changing very, very quickly, and it may be that Tron was just going to naturally be checked by this new emerging format, which had more fast decks, like the Rakdos, or technically Grixis if you count the Show and Tell's, Reanimator decks. Looking at some of the specific data that we have, this is the most recent MetaMage set of data, and this looks at MTGO top 32 results and MTG Melee results. And when we look at Tron up here in this top row, it has a 52.1% win percentage. And a lot of times the scary number that we often cite is around 55%. Tron's not there right now. It has been in other charts. It's not there right now. And this was data from about a week ago, just FYI. And as of that time, Tron doesn't just have green matchups across the top of the board anymore. It is slightly negative versus Grixis Reanimator. That's, borderline coin flip, and ever so slightly not favored versus Izzet Delver, while having a very strong matchup versus a few things that you might see around the top table, so to speak. But, there are clearly other decks around that are outperforming it. And Grixis Reanimator, as of a week ago, was basically beating everything relatively consistently that was at the top of the metagame. And Doomsday, similarly, was doing very, very well versus the stuff at the top of the metagame. So, as of a week ago, Tron was, I think, pretty clearly on the decline. And I think we're seeing the same thing that we saw with the Oops All Spells update, where when Oops got a card hit from it recently, the data was showing that Oops was on the decline. But I think since those decisions are made ahead of time, by the time that decision actually came out, the data they're presenting isn't true anymore. And I think the same thing happened here, where Tron was problematic and people were having a very hard time adapting to it. And then we figured it out. The answer was don't play their game. The answer was get them dead in the first 2 turns. And we saw decks like Grixis Reanimator that can go incredibly fast, relatively consistently, pop up. And we started seeing more Storm. And I don't yet have a full data set from the post Fantasticar world, but I highly suspect that when we have that data, Tron isn't going to be looking good, because the stuff that's winning right now, as a whole, is going very fast. Reanimator, Beseech the Storm, Reanimator, Show and Tell, Storm, Beseech Storm, Beseech Storm, Beseech Storm, Beseech Storm, Reanimator. You get the idea, right? There are some number of blue-white control decks that are popping up as well. This one that had actual factual Geist of St. Traft stood out to me as being interesting. But if you take a look at these, This is not like blue-white control, like super, super heavy on the sword stuff. This is Force of Will, main deck, Force of Negation, Spell Pierces, Spell Snares. Like, they're clearly trying to go after these things that are going fast with the Game 1 Force of Negations. So I suspect that the data here is not indicative of Tron needing a ban at this time. I think 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, hitting something from Tron would have seemed great. But I think we're in a very different legacy world than we were then. I would say that I'm not upset about something getting hit from Tron. We have seen these colorless big mana decks do incredibly well for a long time, winning multiple Eternal Weekend events over the last couple of years, even after some things like Vexing Bauble got banned from them. I think it's worth thinking about whether or not Candelabra is the card that should have been hit here. And I think I'm just going to read this paragraph verbatim. Candelabra of Tawnos is the card that we're going after because it is the thing that we believe is most likely to cause problems for the format in the long term, and is the least likely to be a fun part of a cyclical metagame. While we continue to print exciting lands and card draw engines, we are extremely careful about printing cards that untap your lands. The core issue specific to Candelabra is that it rarely shows up unless it is in a problematically strong combo deck, where it is often the highest value above replacement card in the deck. We are concerned that trying to ban around Candelabra would result in similar situations in the future. We take banning cards extremely seriously. Whenever we have to make this sort of change in Legacy, we frequently try to minimize the total number of bans that we are going to have to make in the long term. End quote. So let's go back a year. Where does Candelabra show up? Just High Tide. Pretty much just High Tide, occasionally in someone's pet Cloudpost deck. When you go back a year or more, Candelabra of Tawnos is not really a legacy playable card, and the only people who are playing that are the diehards who have invested in Candelabra. So Candelabra rarely shows up, that is true. Unless it is in a problematically strong combo deck. Well, High Tide is a pretty bad deck as a whole, sees basically 0% legacy play, and prior to Planar Nexus, Candelabra untapping Cloudposts was pretty darn rare as well, and I would not call that problematically strong either. I don't love the exact wording here, but I understand the overall sentiment that it's showing up right now because it is too strong. And in the next paragraph, they say that basically they would like to see Tron that exists without Candelabra, which we've already seen before, right? Like, we have already seen people jamming at least one of the Tron lands alongside Planar Nexus to power out the One Ring on turn 2. That's been a part of Legacy for quite some time since Planar Nexus became legal. To me, once the word fun is injected into this paragraph, I think very easily the least fun thing that exists in this shell is the One Ring. This is something that I think is incredibly warping on Legacy, and it breaks a lot of the traditional roles of decks. So conceptually, when you think about the Ancient Tomb decks that are using, not being specific to Tron, but are using Ancient Tomb and Lotus Petals and Spirit Guides or some other things, such as Grim Monoliths to power out things ahead of curve, the way that you beat those decks, generally speaking, is by exhausting their, 2 threats, and you just win the game. Those decks usually don't have a lot of card draw. So if you are the control deck, and you counter their first Haymaker, and then use your Ponders and your Brainstorms or whatever to find a second counterspell to counter the second one, the coast is usually clear after that. And the One Ring is the unfun thing that is the central piece of the engine here. You don't need Candelabra to have a good draw, but just about every time you have the One Ring, you will have a good game, because it represents just so many cards, and those decks are playing ways to untap it as well. And the One Ring is something that you can slot into just about any shell, as long as you have some amount of fast mana or other ways to go and drag the game on. And I think the One Ring is very unfun, because in addition to fogging the first turn it comes down, which is often worth the 4 mana, as it's the difference between you being dead and not, you get an Ancestral worth of value out of it in that first like big turn cycle. So you're guaranteed to get that 1 the first turn, and because you fog, you get 2 more as well. So it's a 4 mana fog that ancestrals, and anytime you start doing anything more to that, like untapping it or having a bunch of mana that can help you further deploy the cards, it gets silly fast. And I think if you are looking to limit the number of cards you would ban, the One Ring is the direction that I would have gone here. That is one of the absolute best payoff cards that exists for any sort of Candelabra shell. And I suspect that getting rid of the One Ring would fully check this deck and allow Candelabra to stay legal in this format for the High Tide diehards and OG Cloud Post diehards who already invested in these cards. But if you'll give me my conspiracy theory for a moment, computer, enhance! Boom, 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 boom. Too far. Part of the reserve list. I wonder if this was a ban motivated by the fact that Candelabra was on the reserve list, and this was something that they could say, like, hey, you all don't need to pay the ridiculous prices for this. Let's just get rid of this reserve list card from it and not have to listen to people complain about the price of Candelabra. Because this is, like, buying a playset of Candelabra is pretty much prohibitively expensive, even by legacy standards. Especially when, like, we live in a world where I think it's very likely that more cards will get banned out of, like, the Ancient Tomb shell until we finally hit the One Ring. Like, investing in these for paper tournaments is a very, very, very scary prospect. The word reserve list does not appear in this article. Probably very intentionally, but I suspect sniping the reserve list card here was an intentional choice. One final thought here in this section. I hear a decent number of people talking about how Planar Nexus is the card that they think should go. And I think Planar Nexus is just the One Ring problem with the different hat. Like, some people do not like that Planar Nexus and one of the Urza's lands produces so much mana so quickly. What are you going to play with that mana? The answer is the One Ring, right? Like, I feel like it always just loops back to the One Ring with the busted big mana shells, and hitting the One Ring means that you have fewer good things to ramp into. Like, at 4 mana, you've got Karn, which, if you've played with Karn a lot, it is an incredibly high variance card, where sometimes it shuts down an opposing deck just based on shutting off the artifact mana. And other times you play Karn, and it's like, okay, cool, I have 9 power on board. You're dead. Get that ensnaring bridge into your hand. You don't have time to deploy it. And I think the One Ring always giving you that time is a really big deal. So I am fine with Planar Nexus existing within this format, and it occasionally does some sweet stuff. And I'm good with that. Proceeding on to the tail end of the article that talks about the remainder of the metagame, this has the government-issued white decks are playable statement in it as well, which has shown up in, like, every one of these articles, and it's wild to me because it's, like, never true that the white decks are actually doing well. Assuming here that white-based creature decks is referring to things in the D&T and Maverick ballpark, according to MTG Goldfish, from the last 14 days, the only white creature deck is Mardu Energy, which is 14th in the format right now. If you count something like a blue-white control deck, that is the 9th most popular deck in the right now. And if we assume that this was written like 2 weeks ago for the most part, then Mardu Energy at that time was the 10th most popular deck in the format. So I don't know why we keep talking about the white decks in these articles. They're just not there. The rest of this is fine. Reanimator is an all-in combo deck for the most part right now. It pivots out of being Reanimator in games 2 and 3 very frequently. Sneak Attack is around. It's just these, like, throwaway comments that are just so frequently not true. They're keeping an eye on flow state, which is good to know. That's something that I thought should have been brought up in other articles in the past, and it just, like, wasn't. We did not get a follow-up statement to some of the things that they were keeping an eye on in previous B&R updates, such as Tamiyo. That's fine. The final paragraph here, I'm not sure how I feel about. I'm going to read this one verbatim again. Finally, we are aware that the community has taken notice of the Fantasticar. It isn't lost on us that this is a card that plays very well with the fast mana and colorless artifact enablers of Eternal formats. We expect that the card has a higher risk of ruin in Vintage than in Legacy, but this announcement should be taken as a demonstration that we are willing to act quickly in the event that a card proves to be an obvious detriment to either format. This announcement should be taken as a demonstration that we are willing to act quickly in the event that a card proves to be an obvious detriment to either format. I would like to point you to any of my B&R update videos from the last 2 years where the biggest thing that I have harped on is Wizards of the Coast moving too slowly and the data that they have being out of date by the time it hits. I do not believe them. I do not believe that they are willing to move quickly in Legacy and Vintage. I just don't. And so many episodes of the Eternal Glory podcast going back for the last 5 years have titles like Come On, Wizards, where we are trying to get them to take action. So we'll see where this actually lands. But I am a skeptic. I will say I personally believe that it is too early to act on the Fantasticar at this time. I don't believe we have a meaningful data set to look at and go, this is cracked. I think the card is incredibly good. And I think a potential problem point with trying to fight back against this card is that it's naturally good versus hate. So, for example, you play a Deafening Silence and your opponent only gets 1 non-creature spell each turn. Cool. Lotus Petal, attack you for 4. Dark Ritual, attack you for 4. That hasn't actually stopped that card. And that sort of thing requires you to leave in something like Swords to Plowshares against a dedicated combo deck, which is pretty awkward. And Hexing Squelcher has done similar things, inputting the squeeze on control decks and tempo decks in terms of how they're using their sideboard slots and what their deck looks like in post-sideboard configurations. You don't care about Null Rod with this. You cast this for 3 mana, and then some other turn, or maybe that same turn, you just vomit out all of your stuff and go. And so the things that keep you from casting multiple spells don't really work against this, and the things that shut off artifacts don't really work against this. Mindbreak Trap is often used against combo decks, but the sequencing for this often goes Dark Ritual, Fantasticar, that spell too, and then you don't care if your other stuff gets countered, because it's when you cast your 4th non-creature, not when you resolve it. So this thing is surprisingly resilient to hate. Admittedly, there are some awkward things where if you draw this in the middle of your combo turn, say after you refresh your hand with Echo of Eons, it is very specifically your 4th non-creature spell each turn. So if you have already cast 4 before you draw this, it doesn't really do a lot, and that's a little weird. So it's not like the card has no downsides, but this is a little hard to fight, which is leading people to try out some very, very unusual things. And I think we're going to see more Force of Despairs and Force of Vigors to specifically try and fight against this thing. And since the top ability, the whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can have it become an artifact creature, since that is optional, that is a May ability, your Fatal Pushes, your Swords to Plowshares, your Lightning Bolt's a bad example, but your spot removal cards aren't actually going to snag this unless your opponent makes a mistake for some reason and turns it into a creature. I would say Fantasticar is a major metagame presence for the next month. I think July Legacy deck building is going to be, what am I doing for fast combo decks like Grixis Reanimator and Fantasticar Storm decks and Arclight Phoenix decks and Doomsday decks that have the Fantasticar? I think that is going to be a defining feature of Legacy in the next month. And in August, depending on how the Fantasticar is doing after the community tries to adapt to it, their moving quickly might be acting in August. Before I wrap things up here, I want to briefly touch on Vintage. because Wizards of the Coast like wants to say we are willing to act quickly in the event that a card proves to be an obnoxious detriment to either format. And they are very aware that the Fantasticar has high risk potential of being problematic in Vintage. They say that with those words. And they are curious whether or not Vintage can absorb this. And if the Fantasticar becomes an issue in Vintage, we won't hesitate to take action. As I show you this next screen here, please keep in mind that the Fantasticar has not been available on Magic Online for very long, and the card is actually still somewhat difficult to get. This card has exploded in price. You can kind of see stock is low on a site like GoatBots here, and they are selling for $60 a piece. So that is $240 if you want a playset of this thing, which you probably want if you are playing it in Vintage. Here's what recent Vintage results look like. There's so much Fleshraker mud already putting up just absolutely incredible results in Vintage. If I was a regular Vintage player here, I think I would have been okay with an immediate restriction on this one. I think this was one of those ones where this article needed to be written Monday morning. I think if you have the data from the weekend, there's a very good chance that you just go like, hey, this is putting up so many results so quickly. I suspect that this might ruin a very, very good format for a little while. But if you want a more nuanced take from someone who is playing more Vintage, I'm sure I am actually level 1. Justin Gennari is putting out a video today as well, if he did not already. So let's kind of do a little conclusion and wrap this up here. I am not unhappy with today's B&R. I don't mind Tron being depowered a little bit, but this should have already had happened if it was going to happen. I don't know that the data at this time supports this banning, and I think this is going to be a very feels bad moment for anyone who has invested in Candelabras for paper Magic recently. I am hoping that the commander appeal of this reserve list card is high enough that the prices on this aren't actually going to significantly dip. I think between it being a very reasonable commander card and it being a reserve list card, that will be fine overall. But I do kind of feel bad for the high tide diehards who lost a major tool from their deck. If it was me pulling the trigger on the B&R update today, I don't know that I would have touched anything. I think I would have said, there are a number of problematic things in this format right now. Tamiyo and the One Ring and Fantasticar in particular, with flow state being something that is worthy keeping an eye on as well. We need to collect more data over the next month, and we will adjust things aggressively with the August B&R update. That is probably what I would have done personally. And add the One Ring to that list. That's something I've been talking about for a very long time. But let me know down in the comments below what you think. I'm going to go get this video uploaded for you all and grab myself some lunch. I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and we're going to have an exciting Legacy world for the next month, that's for sure. Fantasticar is here to say, let's find out how good it is. All right, see ya.